Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to talk about the sales of my books because I'm writing my 3 Do Ask, Do Tell books. I'm writing a new one, which amalgamates everything. Now, the original book was written. The original book was written in 1990 or published in 1997, and the original argument was the idea that forced intimacy in a living space, like a dorm in a college, was similar to the argument of forced intimacy in the military, and that was the way I argued the entire subject. Now, this argument line is very sensitive for most people, but it tends to migrate you into thinking about other issues about free speech and behavior and the difference between behavior and identity and that kind of thing. The original printing of my first book, was about 400 copies. And I did some public speaking at Hamline University and the University of Minnesota, a couple of appearances at a Unitarian fellowship. I did get distribution from Bookmen in Minneapolis, and I did sell out most of the first printing by about 2000. I went to print on demand with iUniverse in August of 2000, and fixed a printing error about the date of the Bill of Rights on the back when I did that with the new copy. Sales became slow as interest diminished over time, but I had started putting the book online in July of 1998, and a coworker hosted the domain that I used. I was working for ING at the time. I'd actually transferred to Minneapolis from Arlington in 1997 because my employer worked in Arlington, worked with military officers, and I didn't want to be writing about something that conceivably was my source of income in a salary job. So I took a transfer to Minneapolis because of a merger. Now, at that time, the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, and then the 1998 Child Online Protection Act became an issue. I became a plaintiff under Electronic Frontier Foundation. Internet access without gatekeeping made my arguments popular as people could find me on search engines free from Google. And my own story about my expulsion at William & Mary in the fall of 1961 started to become known, even if I didn't sell that many copies. The irony of my own military service was pointed out by having 3 draft physicals going from 4F to 1A, winding up in special training in 1968, but getting through and then taking advantage of my grad school education in order to have a safe assignment stateside and not go to Vietnam, which of course is a justice issue in itself. I had also been an assistant instructor at grad school, and my giving students grades could have sent them into the draft, which is another aspect of my story which would be controversial. Now, the story supporting the argument about the ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in chapters 2, 1, 2, and 4, which was the narrative style. Chapter 3 was about my coming out a second time, living in New York, and then in Dallas, and my getting through the AIDS epidemic, and which I don't follow up on in the book, but that was covered in the narrative section of the book. Chapter 5 in the first book was just about an essay about workplace and family discrimination, family values and discrimination. In chapter 6, I made a proposal for a constitutional amendment, which has become obsolete with time. So that's why the book is kind of obsolete and needs to be updated. Then we had 9/11. And then the second book was a set of essays inspired somewhat by the terrorism threat, and also the idea of a Bill of Rights too, about individual rights, the ideas then as gay rights was interpreted, and then military conscription, and then the idea about polarities, the Paul Rosenfeld's polarity theorem, the Paul Rosenfeld's, which is similar to gender identity today, but Paul never intended it to be used that way. It's also similar to Judith Butler in as ideas about performativities, which are better known. I reset. I moved back, helped take care of my mother from 2003 till she passed away 2010. She passed away just as Don't Ask, Don't Tell was being, the legislation to end it was being passed almost on the same day. So she lived long enough to see my effort succeed. I had noticed when I was living with her, I was still trying to get jobs, and employment seemed kind of, the job market in general had turned to hucksterism, which was a reason for my having problems. My online presence created an issue when I went into substitute teaching in 2005. I restarted with a structured inheritance trust in 2011 and worked census for 2 years. I got a call from iUniverse in February of 2012 about my slow sales after hearing nothing for 10 years. And I said the book was just too old, and went ahead and wrote a third book, which had to do with taking up the subject of self-publishing, was kind of a meta book, had an unusual format. And then I went along and sold the house. We had the pandemic, in 2020, and then as we came out of the pandemic, I became aware of the gender ideology, gender identity issue. At the same time, I was getting pressure to sell the books that I had written from Author Solutions or iUniverse. I actually used Ex Libris, which is another subsidiary for the third book, to get away from the calls all the time. And I spent about $100,000 selling the old books with various bookstore marketing campaigns and going to book fairs, particularly in Miami. And it went to 2 pitch fests. The second one in Los Angeles in February of 2023 really went well. I got some practical experience in a writer's room run by Practical Screenwriting Group by Tyler Mowry. And I recently went to a film festival sponsored in Texas by Creator Camp. So I've had other, particularly practical screenwriting, which helped me, very helpful to me. And I have a short film based on the expulsion itself, which might be a springbed to making a feature series. Generally, my concern now is the idea that individual rights versus rights because you claim to be in a marginalized group, and what it takes to really be a legitimate marginalized group. I have some ideas about that. The new book would add the material going from the Paul Rosenfeld stuff and Judith Butler's all the way to explaining why gender identity has become the issue it is. And I would also talk about maintaining our standard of living. Given the worldwide problems, it seems like there's a lot of accelerationism that because of climate change and a lot of other problems, countries are tightening up and becoming dictatorships and protecting their own populations, which is not good for the future of the world. Now, so what can we do about that as individuals? That's something I'll talk about. But yes, I'm very concerned about our future. The new book will include all of this. It would also include an appendix for ideas for motion picture or series conversion. But the one idea that's very important is that when you write, you want to be meeting people where you are. You want the writing to pay for itself. You don't want to depend on money from another source or inherited money. That's not good. That's not good for the system. Politics so you have to balance your involvement with politics, with service to other, and with doing your own work and academic work and publishing it. All of them are important. And so that's what I had for today. Thank you for listening.